The Ward Scott Files is produced by Ward Scott Files, LLC.
Come on, everybody! Come on, everybody!
This is a Ward Scott Files advisory. The Ward Scott Files radio show may contain material not suited for people who are easily offended. Trust us on this. This show contains adult information and opinions. Please protect small children, sensitive pets, fragile houseplants, and liberal relatives. Thank you.
All right, good morning, good morning. Here we are on a rainy morning here in north central Florida, broadcasting from a dry, secret location, the Warthog Man Cave. And Professor Ward Scott here, sometimes known as the Warthog. And we are going to bring you several items today that, of course, some of which are national and some of which are educational. A lot of things here to talk about. Yes, happy rainy Friday, I think. It's raining all over Georgia. Anyway, I won't get into that singing right now. But there it is. Is that was? Oh, you were going to play that song or play your guitar or something? Okay. Well, of course, the big news out on the national front is Uncle Joe getting out there to throw his hat in the ring. And I got to say, we already got a theme that's emerging, and this is the theme for today's show that I like to illustrate for how we got it. Is it's really it's put it up there. Say there it is. Caving to the radical left. That is what these Democrat candidates are doing, and I'm going to illustrate that for you. That I think that now he's trying to play the center, but he's not going to get away with it because the radical left is going to run the Democrat Party going into this campaign. Uncle Joe likes to think that he's the bland candidate, that he's really walking the line in the middle and he'll appeal to all the people. But you watch. He's already begun to play the radical left chords. And the first thing he did, he's put out on a 3.5-minute YouTube video, and he used the August 2017 riots as his primary motivation. Joe Pollock writing about this, some others noticing this, that this is a cheap shot. Primary motivation, that's his primary motivation for running against Trump. And he coined the phrase, the soul of the country, which is, one of those things that means anything and everything to anybody and everybody. And it doesn't, no hard policy in that statement. There's no, you can't pin it down. It's an abstraction. And so he's going to get into the narrative and start using the words as these people do to try to control the way you look at things. So he's using this primary motivation and basing it on events that even CNN realized were fraudulent. He even went back to Thomas Jefferson and said that Charlottesville is a quote from is a home to a defining moment for this nation in the last few years. And then he follows with footage of neo-Nazi procession. The neo-Nazi thing is the biggest lie you can have perpetrated on us right now. First of all, Nazis were socialists, all right, extreme left. They were not radical right. They were actually behaving the way the radical left of the Democrat Party is behaving. And this is a classic misuse of language, a classic rewriting of history, a classic exploitation of people's emotions. And we know that we have a very uneducated population voting, and it's getting weaker in my humble opinion, and less informed, ironically, in an age when we've got more information available than we've ever had before. But the problem is you've got to have a built-in crap detector to know what part of that information is accurate and what isn't accurate, and that's very difficult to know. That's one of the things we try to help you with here on the Ward Scott Files, and that's what I'm going to try to help you with today, to let you know how much of this is fraudulent that he's presenting as his reason for running. So first of all, he has set up a straw character. He's attacking as an ad hominem attack here in logic. It's attacking a person on the basis of the person, not the policies. Trump had nothing to do with Charlottesville, and Charlottesville was grossly miswritten about, grossly used by the press to, kowtow to the far left of the party, mislabeling people, labeling people to start with. And then this guy, Biden, picks up on it and actually uses it as an exploitative device. And he then said in his YouTube video, he says they were chanting the same anti-Semitic bile heard in the 30s. Now the Jewish people have come back and said, don't be using me. And we've already had Candace Owens say this to the Democrats, don't be using the blacks. And now the Jewish folks have come back and said to Biden, don't be using us to play off against, because we're not part of what you're talking about, and you've got it bass backwards, and quit trying to drag us into this thing when we don't have anything to do with it. He made the Antifa extremists a courageous group of Americans. Yes, among those things, a courageous group of Americans were left-wing Antifa extremists. And then even Pelosi later condemned them after they caused another riot. So this Biden then debunked the very fine people claim. Remember, Trump tried to tone down the emotional outcry that was exploitive by the press and the progressive left. And he said, well, listen, they're very fine people on both sides. And so Biden says, well, you know, with these words, the President of the United States assigned a moral equivalence between those spreading hate and those with the courage to stand against it. So, you know, this is, I'm going to present this to you. I was a professor of language. This is one of the most dangerous rhetoric displays I've seen by a presidential candidate. This thing is inflammatory, it's accusatory, it's filled with logical fallacies. It's designed not to unite the country, but to divide the country. And the only thing that Biden is going to have is to run it, quote unquote, against Trump. There's nothing else he has. Because I'm going to go back and I'm going to show you some of his policies in a minute, which he's renounced under pressure from the far left. So he's going to be simply running, bashing Trump. And he's going to invent all sorts of things to hang around Trump. And I think Trump is going to handle it in typical Trumpster fashion. He's going to belittle it. He's going to make fun of it. And every time Biden comes up with one of these remarks, Trump is going to make light of it and blame it on Uncle Joe's just not all there with it, you know. And so this involved, I think it's really set the tone for what we're going to talk with you about in the first part of our show today about Biden. Already people have been researching how flippant this guy is. CNN even recently exposed how Biden had courted the support of segregationists in the 70s in a campaign to resist busing, of course, which was the mandatory radical integration of schools. I know all about that. That happened here. And in 2007, Biden infamously called Barack Obama the first mainstream African American who is articulate and bright and clean, a nice-looking guy. Huh? Hey, the brothers didn't like that. I can tell you that right now. It was a racial remark. Of course, Uncle Joe doesn't know when he puts his hoof in his mouth. And, let me repeat that. He called Barack Obama the first mainstream African American who is articulate and bright and clean and a nice-looking guy. Are you kidding me? In 2012, they're starting to gather all these Bidenisms where he put, as I say, his hoof in his mouth. In 2012, on the campaign trail, he told a largely black audience that Republicans wanted to, quote, put y'all back in chains. Oh, God. And since then, Biden has joined other Democrats in courting the support. And this is why I'm saying the radical far left is going to pull him over there, because he doesn't have a position. The only position, the only integrity he's got is to just slam Trump. But we're going to be able to pull all this stuff up and share it with you. He is also courting the support, and I don't know why anybody would do this, except it tells you how bad the Democrat Party, the shape it's in. It's courting the support of Al Sharpton, who's a known racist and anti-Semite. So, and now he's trying to say that Donald Trump has changed the soul of the nation and is threatening our democracy. Huh? And so he is out there running this up the flagpole, and just all this debate is going on whether or not he stiff-armed Obama's support or Obama stiff-armed him, or both. Yeah, or both. he has claimed that, and here's the real reason, Obama's a kiss of death. I mean, anybody in the Democrat Party who associates him or herself or itself or whatever is going on sexually in the Democrat Party, any of those who associate themselves with Hillary the liar or Obama the traitor is really in jeopardy. They don't want to be around the guy because he or her, they bring up so much negativity. And so they're trying to now, of all things, attach themselves, as we've been showing you, to AOC, who is just one wing nut away from having a complete flat tire. I mean, I can only tell you that. The things are not bolted down well in her head. But nevertheless, I mean, she's basically the best they've got. And so they're all piling in there with her. And of all other things, the Muslims, Omar and Tlaib, and trying all, you know, they don't have anywhere to go other than to follow the loudmouths and the ones who collectively attack Trump. So who knows why Biden has stiff-armed his old buddy there we're showing you a picture of. And but the fact remains that for those who are really watching this, Biden is running on inflammatory, fearful, hoax-type statements that are really dividing America rather than uniting America. And that is going to be interesting to watch. So he has launched this whole thing by being divisive, by playing the Jew card and having it backfire on him. He's also gone and begged forgiveness from Anita Hill, and that has backfired on him because she says, I don't want your patronizing, for you to come over here and say, I'm sorry, because he was the chair of this committee, and she feels like, you know, he could have helped her with her accusations of the Supreme Court candidate. So now, in order to curry favor, once again, this guy is a spineless guy, okay? He's not a tough guy. He doesn't stand for anything. He doesn't have a belief. He's like a weather vane. I mean, you know, we've got, you know what weather vane, they twist and this, that, one thing, another. So now he wants to get back in the good graces of two things he could do if he could get her endorsement. He could get the women and he could get the blacks. But she stiff-armed him as well and said publicly, I don't really want your apology. It doesn't help and it doesn't go far enough, and probably there's a lot more behind that feeling that she expressed in those words than is actually she's capable or willing to say publicly. Probably she wants to say, I hate your guts and I'm not going to help you. So one of the really interesting things that I'm going to use to show you, you know, how low this guy will go in terms of trying to curry the favor of the far left. This has been written by Raphael Mangual, who is a deputy director of the legal policy at the Manhattan Institute. You know, I read the Wall Street Journal, and I pay attention to some things, and this was written just yesterday. And the irony, there's irony in this, in that once upon a time, Biden was tough on crime. Now, he's not tough on crime now because of the very reason it is cited in this article would not fly right with the blacks and these radical socialist lefties who have been saying, well, the laws are really unfair. They're written to protect white guys, and therefore they pick on the black guys. So this Raphael Mangual has given us some data that is pretty interesting. And I want to go through the data with you because I think I like data, I like specifics, I don't like the abstract nouns and things like this Biden has used. So let's go back to when we had a kind of effort to do some drug prohibition. We had tough on crime, and even this 1986 law was co-sponsored in the House by 16 of the 19 members of the Congressional Black Caucus. It was an attempt it was called the Anti-Drug Abuse Act of 1986, which established a widely revealed sentence disparity between crack and powder cocaine, and now has become, you know, the hue and cries, oh, it's systematic racism. Here are the facts that belie the fact that it's systematic racism. It doesn't have anything to do with racism. Most drug offenders, 59% serve less than 1 year in prison, okay? Now, I'm going to go through these statistics with you, and you decide, you know, what they mean to you. But most drug offenders, 59%, serve less than 1 year in prison. We've seen that locally here. We've got people roaming the streets that are out there, convicted felons, have not been in a jug very long, who are packing guns and shooting at each other right now at the hookah lounge and at these other places, right here in this town right here. The vast majority, 76.4% of state prisoners, which account for about 90% of all prisoners, are in for violent felonies. 54.5% are property related, 18% weapons related, and only 15.2 in the state prison for drug offenses. So the criminal justice thing has eroded, and fewer and fewer are actually staying in prison and going to prison since originally there was a crackdown. Now the point is Biden was for the crackdown, but now he's not for the crackdown. So the theory then was escalating the war on drugs was a way to really root out the criminals, and they were often involved in serious violent and property crimes. So the relationship between drugs and other crimes is never changed. It holds today. More than 3/4 of released drug offenders get rearrested for a non-drug crime. Now Biden is walking that back, but back then in the 80s and the 90s he was pitching it because, well, guess what? I mean, the party politics were different, and so this guy really, he's basically walking around on quicksand. And the Justice Department studies from 2000 to 2009 show that only about 40% of state felony convictions result in a prison sentence. Now that's pretty interesting. Only about 40% of state felony convictions result in a prison sentence. So that means you're out here walking around next to guys who are convicted of felonies. Now the data on time served indicates that there is less truth in sentencing than you would think. The critics of the 1994 crime bill, which Biden was for then, would have you believe. State prisoners released in 2016 served 46% of their maximum sentence on average. And according to the Bureau of Justice Statistics, 1/5 of murderers and 57% of sexual assailants serve less than, and should be fewer, serve fewer than 5 years. Now, so you know what we're walking around in the midst of. And now Biden is joining this refrain that, oh, well, yeah, it really is a racist kind of policy. Back then, he was all for it. Nearly 40% of all released state prisoners serve less than 1 year behind bars. These are some things that we've known here on the Ward Scott Files. We see this all the time when we get into researching candidates and people. We look at the rap sheets, we look at the crime. It's look at the people out on the streets, and we take a look, and my golly, doesn't anybody ever get held accountable? And there's a cohort of more than 400,000 state prisoners released in 30 states in 2005. They were tracked. Okay, this study tracked them. Within 3 years, 68% were arrested for a new offense, and that number went up to 79% by year 6 and 83% by year 9. Now, the most radical of the Democrat candidates on this, of course, is Crazy Bernie, who says, let them all vote. Let them all vote. I mean, but here are the statistics that tell you what you're dealing with. You're dealing with a group of people who, by all studies, really don't, they're sociopaths, if you want to use that word. But even the University of Chicago Crime Lab, which is cited in this article, found that those convicted of homicides or shootings in 2015-16 in Chicago, now get this, had an average of 12 prior arrests. Okay, 12 prior arrests. In 2007, that was all racist though, see, now that's all become racist now. In 2017, Baltimore police identified 118 murder suspects. They had an average, get this now, an average of 9.3 prior arrests, and 35.6% committed the alleged offense while on probation or parole. Huh? Come on. Are you kidding me? Now, violent criminals convicted in America's 75 largest counties over a 12-year period, these studies found that 56% had at least one prior conviction, and 37% of those convicts committed the offense while on probation, parole, or after being released pending disposition of a prior case, okay? Of a prior case. It is really, meanwhile, you've got Al Sharpton over here, whom Biden now is courting, saying, oh, but this is really, really racist. This is very, very unfair. This needs to be corrected. And of course, keep an eye on Biden as he goes through his campaign to see which tune he sings, okay? And whether or not he has been hijacked, which I think all the signs indicate that he has been, even though he's trying to present himself as a middle-of-the-roader and a rational guy, all the signs are pointing to him being in the hands of these people who have all the stats to back up what the real situation is on the crime. Now, this is the victimization rate for blacks. That's even more of an untold story and more of a warped presentation publicly. Homicides committed from 1980 to 2008. The studies found that the victimization rate for blacks was 6 times as high as for whites. So the blacks were victimizing each other. It wasn't any of this stuff that Biden has presented deliberately in his Charlottesville opening, if you will, trip into the political world. It's time to run for the president. And you've just got to watch what you're listening to, pay attention to it, and try to get behind it. This offending rate was almost 8 times as high, and it's still there today. And what this means, all right, this is the conclusion by this Mr. Mangual, and I invite you to contemplate it and draw your own, information and inferences from what I've just presented to you in synopsis, is what this means is that the disparity that Black America has been the primary beneficiary of the decline in crime that began is really not the case. The impact of the decline in homicides on the life expectancy of black men is roughly, and this is a comparison, the equivalent of eliminating obesity altogether. Oh, boy. So now what my point is, and why Jay and I have put up here today, that Biden's been hijacked. Biden is really in the hands of the left wing. He is going to try to hide that. He's going to try to present Trump as a radical right-winger and make him out to be the racist and make him out to be... when you look at Trump, he doesn't... One of the things you got to say about the guy, he never changes his policies. He never changes what he stands for. He is what he is. I think he's the most transparent guy you've ever had in the office. I mean, he's on Twitter all the time. He's on, he doesn't make any bones about what he's trying to accomplish and how he's trying to accomplish it. So, be that as it may, you're going to have to keep an eye on this and make sure that, you have some balanced input into your data bank to try to figure out what's going on. So, the record on crime, this is the Wall Street Journal article, is different from Biden. Back then, he really was supporting, because that was the kind of the theory of the day, and the theory was sound. I mean, it really was sound. According to these statistics, now the liberalization of the judicial system has ironically hurt blacks more than anybody else, because the blacks' victimization of each other has increased so dramatically. So it's not, hey, I mean, go look at Chicago, go look at the east side of Gainesville. It's nothing new. That just helps with the data. Now, that's one thing that happens when you get the left controlling the rhetoric. The other thing I want to present to you, and I have an article here by somebody whom I tremendously respect, and that's Heather McDonald. Heather McDonald writes about as well about America and crime and liberalism as anyone I've read. She's been banned from colleges because she is a conservative and because she makes sense, I would offer to you. And we have been covering this word diversity and its companion word inclusion for a long, long time. And those are now the buzzwords all through education, all right? And she's going to do better than I could ever have done a systematic analysis of how that has infected, I will say infected, not affected, how it's infected education. And she's focusing on Yale, all right? Now, let's go, and she starts with a specific case, which is what I like about people who think, well, they have specifics. And she says that what made Yale do what I'm going to report that she reported they did started as a result of a bureaucratic incident to a graduate student, which the institution bloated and exaggerated, okay? And this was the incident. There was, in May 2018, an incident where a graduate student, in a graduate student dorm, a woman named Sarah Brosh, who was a 43-year-old doctoral candidate in philosophy, she called the campus cops at about 1:40 a.m. To report someone sleeping in a common room, okay, what's called a common room, which she herself believed was against dorm rules, all right? The Yale administrators knew this woman very well, and they knew that she had psychological problems. Now, does this remind you of Ballsy? Does it, anyone? So they knew that she had psychological problems and that she had a history of bad blood with the sleeping student, who was Lolade Siliombala, a 35-year-old doctoral candidate in African studies. But because Brosh is white and Siliombala is black, the administration chose, McDonald says, to turn the incident into a symbol of what Mr. Salovey called the university's discrimination and racism. Mr. Salovey is the president of Yale, okay? So, according to Heather McDonald's research, and her research is par excellence, they took the opportunity at Yale administratively to create from that a whole bureaucratic load of lingo that is, and the reason I'm tying this to Biden, is the language of the far left that Biden's going to have to submit to if he's going to make it through to be a candidate against Trump. Now, so what happened is the Yale leaders immediately came up with all kinds of initiatives. McDonald calls it a slew of them, S-L-E-W, I love that word, a slew of new initiatives. And here were some of them, and we've heard them already and we've presented them to you already. Implicit bias. Now, Jay, you can chime in here because you're at the college. You tell me if you heard any of this stuff before at the university. Implicit bias training for graduate students.
Oh, I've heard it for everyone, not just graduate students.
And this is for grad school staff and campus police, okay?
Oh, yeah.
You got to go through the implicit bias training. In other words, you're biased, you don't even know it, okay? Now, furthermore, instructions on how to run, are you ready for this, Jay? Inclusive classrooms. Inclusive classrooms. Now, this is government intrusion into academic freedom.
Yeah, we saw this a lot. Like here at UF, we had free speech zones that Young Americans for Prosperity actually just declared those unconstitutional and got it over in court. And now we can speak freely wherever we're at UF. Do you realize that? Like, we had free speech zones at UF. There are places you couldn't speak freely.
Well, and that caused the snowflakes to feel threatened. And just like this woman used this and Yale jumped on it. So I'm not finished with this. You're probably going to get this. A student retreat to develop the next phase of equity and inclusion programming. All right? Oh, yeah, they have that at Yale. Now, that wasn't the end of it. That was just the beginning of it. Duke has gotten involved with this too. And actually, few students have actually ever complained about it. But the university has used these exaggerated instances to create a claim that diversity training is long overdue. And that's what we need to, here's why I'm going with this, address the soul. Are you with me? See how these words connect? The soul of America. Because back to Biden's premise, it is the soul of America that is corrupt. In other words, spiritually bad.
How do these people even know what a soul is?
Well, that's a good point. I mean, but you're way over their head with that. James Brown was once asked if there's any white guys with soul, and he said, yeah, there's that one guy from the Welsh singer, Tom Jones. That's the only white guy I know that's got soul. But here's the deal. Now, here's what's happened at Yale. Now, they have a presidential committee on diversity and inclusion. They have a committee on racial and ethnic harassment. Doesn't this fit into what Biden's trying to appeal to? Do you get my point? Huh? Okay. On racial and ethnic harassment, they have a committee on diversity and inclusion working group. They have a committee on intercultural affairs council. Huh? We have a chief diversity officer. We have an associate dean for graduate student development and diversity in the Graduate School of Arts and Sciences. And we have an assistant director of diversity in arts and sciences. We have an associate dean for graduate student development and diversity in the School of Engineering. Huh? We have an assistant director of diversity and inclusion in the law school, in the Lyre School, right? We have a director of community and inclusion in the School of Management. Isn't that where you are in the School of Management?
I'm in the School of Management and the School of Communications.
Yeah. Have you been to your inclusion class yet?
I'm white, man.
Well, it don't matter. The deputy dean there's one in the School of Medicine, all right, for diversity and inclusion. Even in the School of Forestry. Yes, and there's no question about what it would be in the environmental studies.
Ward, they just know that they can keep bitching and bitching and bitching, and they'll get what they want. They're like a stupid little kid, right? You give if the kid whines, has a temper tantrum in the middle of the story, wants some fucking cookies, right? So you give the kid the cookies, right? Because he's crying. What do you think he's going to do?
Well, the directors of the Afro-American Cultural Center also, of course, have a equity and inclusion component, as does the Latino Cultural Center and the Pocahontas Native American Cultural Center. Okay?
Ward, there are more on-campus groups that are exclusive. There's a Hispanic, there's so many Hispanic groups on campus exclusive to Hispanics. There's so many groups on campus exclusive to blacks. There's black sororities. There's Hispanic sororities. There's Asian sororities. Ward, the diversity at UF is beyond diverse. It's actually exclusive to white people.
Well, that's one of the points that she's making here, and here's what she's saying. I'm going to get to the conclusion of her because this is a very fine. Heather McDonald. I recommend you read Heather McDonald. I recommend you read Victor Davis Hanson. I recommend you read Thomas Sowell. So here's what she says. Yale is perpetuating a false narrative. Biden is going to play to that false narrative, and he's going to create an extension of that false narrative. So that Yale, like the vast majority of colleges, McDonald says, and universities, encourages, this is the point that she doesn't like. This is the point of her essay, I'm sure. Encourages its minority students to think of themselves as victims. So this is why, when you look at it, Biden is renouncing his position in the 80s and the 90s of tough on crime to soften it and now make it be an exploitive thing of blacks by white racists. And the chief of that crowd, of course, would be Trump. This is the way this false narrative is going to be stitched together with the universities. It's going to be stitched together with the far left of the Democratic Party. And I submit to you that any Democrat candidate that makes it to the forefront is going to have to allow him or herself or itself to be taken over by this far left false narrative. So it is a false narrative. Make sure that you pay attention to this and you understand what's behind it and why it's happening and how it's the only thing they got. The only thing I really think they got to go after Trump is a false narrative. They've been using it and it failed. First of all, they tried the Russian hoax and they thought, oh my golly, this will get him. You know, he can't get away from it. Well, that investigation didn't work out the way they wanted it to. So now they're complaining about the investigator and they want to investigate what the investigator investigated until they can get that narrative in their pocket. Now they're shopping, I would suggest, and Biden obviously did a lot of research on this. They're shopping for a candidate who will stitch all these things together that the far left believes in and has infiltrated all the institutions with. And they're going to probably try to use Uncle Joe as a milder front to it all, but don't make any false assumptions about it. He is right up to his neck in it, and he will be governed by it. Now, this has been looked at very nicely by the Daily Caller by Peter Hansen, who says there are 9 radical things that have been presented by these guys who are trying to run out there that are really kind of off the wall. And we know what many of them are already. Packing the Supreme Court. They are just going out of their mind over the fact that Trump has gotten control right now of the Supreme Court. And one of the things you're going to have to watch carefully is how this thing comes down about the census and asking about whether or not you're a citizen or not. But here's how they're going to try to do it. All of them have talked about, and this is the way they're going to attack it, expanding the Supreme Court. And the reason they want to expand, keep your eye on this, the reason they want to expand the Supreme Court is because they want to water down the slim majority that the conservatives have. And so the left wing, and the radical left wing is who's running the Democrat Party. That's my point today, and that's the point that Biden is in the control of them. Okay? The left-wing activists have been pressuring these Democrats to support what is called court packing. And court packing means they couldn't stop Kavanaugh's confirmation, okay? You know, they haven't been able to stop Trump over here with the Ghouls investigation. They couldn't stop Kavanaugh's confirmation. So now they want to pack the court. They even want the people who are on the court to be elected to the court, because they just are beside. The other thing they want to do, watch this, is lower the voting age to 16. Harris and Cory Booker have both expressed, and so has Paulsy Pelosi. They have all, then this is another a thing that they're going to run up the flagpole, is because if they could get the court more liberal by packing it, by expanding the number of justices, and even controlling the way in which they're there so they don't have to go through presidential appointment, if they could do that, that'd be a big feather in their cap. They feel like to be getting back on the power grid. And then the other thing, of course, is lowering the voting age. And already the voting thing is the most porous thing, I think. We just don't have control over it at all. I mean, as I said jokingly, but I really sort of mean it, if you can make a fog on a mirror, you can vote. And that's, I mean, in spite of all this stuff where, you got to know an ID and sign this, sign that, the problem is, hey, there's fraud all over the place. We've chronicled it. We've caught it, We caught, Andrew Gillum's brother living in Chicago and living in Florida at the same time. The other thing, of course, that they're going to do is they're going to force this transformational sexual thing out onto the front thing, which is kind of an umbrella. It includes the LGBTWXYZ. It includes allowing all these females and males to compete on the same teams, transgender women to compete on female sports teams. They would like to amend, all right, the civil rights, this is according to this analysis by Daily Caller, they would like to amend the Civil Rights Act of 1964 to make also a part of that act sexual orientation and gender identity. Now there is a real loophole there. That is maddening to think of that. And then that would open up what is a biological male, what is a transgender female. The biggie too that they're after, they're really, really strenuously after it, is abolishing the Electoral College. Oh my golly, if they could just do that and abolish the Electoral College, they'd be so happy. Then they could let California and New York run the country, because the population density, if you want to see a model for it, look in Alachua County, the center of the county here, downtown Gainesville, where all the density is, runs the county commission. There's not a county commissioner on the county commission, and there never will be.
I guess good thing everyone's leaving California and New York.
Well, that's because we were able to put in a different tax code, and that is one thing. But not everyone is leaving. But the point is, they are earnest about this, and they're going to put out an awful lot of propaganda about it. And what they're saying, here's the thing they always use. This is the refrain, Jay. Every vote matters. Okay? And the way we can make that happen is that we have national voting, and that means getting rid of the Electoral College. Now you pile in on that all the guys in the jug, all right, including the Boston Marathon bomber, and they all get to vote. Now, one of the things that's going on here, thankfully, is we are cracking down on that Florida. You got to pay back that which you stole before you can get that felon thing overturned. We'll be talking to Senator Keith Perry here in a little bit, hopefully, and that'll come through. We're working on it in Florida because we got DeSantis, and boy, they hate that. So they want to abolish, they want to kill, now this is a biggie, and they're really going to pound on this. They want to kill private health insurance, all right? They want to kill it. And they want government Medicare for all. Well, the problem with that is they don't create any more doctors, they don't create any more hospitals, and what that's going to result in is the same situation you have in Canada and Europe. I mean, Mick Jagger came here for his operation. He'd been on a waiting list in spite of being Mick Jagger for 2 or 3 years in the system in Europe and Canada. So if we get that system ushered in here, you can say, oh, golly, we all got health care. Oh, you all got health care? You know who's going to tell you whether you get the treatment or not? The government. And because the way they're going to do it, the government's going to tell the doctor, well, we statistically studied the probability of the guy that age with that ailment ever living if you give him the medicine, and he's in a crowd that doesn't live, so just don't bother to give him the medicine, or we're not going to pay you for it. If you want to give him the medicine, we're not going to pay you for it. We're not going to cover it if you prescribe it. That's the way they're going to run your life. So non-physicians are going to run your health care. Don't think it isn't going to happen if they get their wish. And this whole thing of terrorists and mass murderers getting to vote in federal elections. I got to take a sip of coffee on that. Really? Really? Huh? That's nuts. I mean, it's just blatantly nuts. They're free college and forgiving the debt which these people incurred on their own and never paid back. So everybody who works, everybody who works is going to have to pick up the tab for the guys who didn't balance their profit and loss sheet properly. And it's nuts. Canceling the student loan debt. You watch, that is going to be one of the planks in any Democrat's platform who makes it to the head of the pack of that crowd. Sanders, of course, he's a Democratic socialist, according to their Daily Caller analysis, which most of agree with. He's been demanding free college for years, and Pocahontas wants to go further than that. She wants to, forgive student debt. Now, how are they going to do this? Confiscation. Now, the whole pack of them are for wealth confiscation. Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez is leading the call on this. Coming out of, I think the funniest thing was ever said about her was said by Palsy Pelosi, when Palsy said, a glass of water with a D next to it could have gotten elected in Cortez's district. Well, be that as it may, the girl got elected. Now they all want to jump on this wagon of going after the people who make the money and taking it away from them and giving it to these proposals that will cover the people who don't. And in order to pay for a free college promise, Warren would have to levy a 2% annual wealth tax on households. Now, that 2% is deceptive because of the way it also applies to whether or not you are taxing your capital gains and things of that nature. And if you're doing that, then you're really getting more than 2% taxed. So this is a really constitutional fuzzy proposal. And Warren's plan would levy a 2% annual wealth tax on households with a net worth over $50 million and on an additional 1% tax on households with a net worth exceeding $1 billion. We're not getting Keith Perry right now, so we'll be continuing, and we'll maybe try in another minute or two, and then we'll move on. So there are 9 things, okay, that the Daily Caller has chronicled for you that any of these Democrat candidates is going to have to be supportive of, or they're not going to make it through the pack. Packing the Supreme Court, watering down the influence of the conservatives, okay? And that is something that is, hey, you ask yourself if anything's doable. Well, you lose the Senate and you lose the House, and which you've already lost, and yeah, you'll find out what's doable. I mean, they'll run ramshod with this stuff. So you got packing the Supreme Court, you got lowering the voting age, and extending those to those who heretofore haven't been voting. So you've got that component too. You know, getting into the sexual ambiguity and making that a legitimate voting base. So that is something as well. And then, of course, abolishing the Electoral College is a biggie. They've been complaining about that being unfair for quite some time. So these policies to thinking people are radical, okay? But to the Democrats, they're not radical at all. To not have them would be to be, of course, you would not be here's how it's going to be played. You're not soulful, okay? If you don't want to expand the Electoral College, if you don't want to extend voting rights to more and more people so that every vote counts, you're not soulful. You don't really have the spiritual well-being of America. If you want, meanwhile, you know, this the number one issue that the Republicans are concerned about, if you poll them, is immigration. It absolutely drives those of us who are responsible and believe in structure and accountability, and they have misused the language on this too. The radical left has said that you're against immigrants. You're not against immigrants. You're against a porous policy that doesn't exist for screening who is entitled to be here and who isn't. So that becomes a distortion as well. So you're not against the people. Now, that's another thing in Biden's little umbrella statement that he's trying to use to illustrate a distorted point that, see, you Republicans must be against the people because you don't want to let just hordes and hordes and hordes of people into the country. That's nuts. You know, I mean, it's really nuts. Meanwhile, under DeSantis, the Florida GOP, let's just take a look at Florida for a minute. The Florida GOP is full Trump on immigration under DeSantis. It used to be that the Florida Republicans were once worried at hardline immigration policies. This is according to Gary Fineout, and this is being written in Politico. Would alienate Hispanic voters. Actually, it shows the polls that the Hispanic voters currently are pro-Trump, and they too want to be protected from the chaos of people coming in here who distort their legitimacy. And so DeSantis, being a Trump guy, understands this. He's heeding, the GOP-led legislature is heeding DeSantis' call, and it's poised to pass legislation cracking down on these so-called sanctuary cities. I mean, that is really, that's a good one. And we're hoping to get Keith Perry on the line. I don't know if we're going to get him. Yeah, he's not answering, so we're going to move on. But the whole business here of cracking down on these sanctuary cities is a good move by DeSantis, and it needs to be said because the bill would be a triumph for a wing of the party that's been demonized by the left. And it would also, according to Politico, call the bluff of moderates and Democrats who have long predicted that anti-immigration policies would mean electoral catastrophe for the Republicans. And we're going to see that tested because I don't think it is going to be a catastrophe for the Republicans, particularly when you poll, you see that it's exactly the opposite. The people are crying out for some order there. And even as diffused as it is for many people who live far away from the actual impact at the border, they still get the point. They still understand that, you know, this is disorderly, it's chaotic, and why would a nation submit itself willingly and deliberately to disorder and chaos? And the only answer you can come up to is that the left tries to turn it into an advantage to them. So this ties into Biden's little discussion. Anybody who is against all the things that would, of course, be included in what I've just been going through with you, from diversity and inclusion to immigration to the way in which the judicial system has treated the minorities. Anybody who's against that, which of course the Republicans are against, are wicked. And when you say soul, what you're really saying is evil. And so what he's really trying to say is that right now the Republicans are evil and we don't have any good people but us. So this has been consistent with what the progressive left has always done. Its arrogance is that it is morally superior. Its positions are morally superior, and they always omit the details. That's why I went through with Heather McDonald for you, and why I went through with Mr. McGall's analysis. They omit the details. When you see a presentation that doesn't have specifics in it, you always should distrust it. When it's all abstract all the way through, from beginning to end, with words that go after emotions, people's emotions, and try to work those into the discussion, you should be suspicious of it. You should be on guard for that, because that is an easy way to manipulate you. Now, even as I said yesterday, Sotomayor has claimed in this discussion about the citizenship question, and this goes into the Supreme Court issue that we were talking about. She said in her discussion about whether or not the census should have a question on it about being a citizen, she said that made the Hispanics fearful of the Trump administration. Now, you talk about the politicalization of the judicial system. My golly, is that not a good example? Huh? We've been talking about the politicalization of the judicial system, and here it is in the highest court in the land. I mean, it's just all over the place, and you can't very well get around it when she says this in her argumentation about. And of course, she's an advocate of leaving off the question about whether or not you are, a citizen from the census, and she's making up data that the Hispanics would be particularly scared of that. And when you go actually poll and take a look at what's going on, the Hispanics are not behaving any way, shape, or form like she says they are. And it's just, it's really Pew Research, okay? Now, the reason this is important is because the Hispanic vote is a large vote, and it is going to outpace Black Americans as the largest voting minority in 2020. All right, John Binder and Pew Research Center. All right, Pew Research Center predicts that the Hispanic American vote will now be the largest voting minority in the 2020 presidential election, and it will pass the Black American voter for the first time in United States history. That is pretty interesting, and that tells you why, does it not? Sotomayor is up there saying, oh, the Hispanics must be afraid. She's actually trying to, I would argue, actually trying to influence the 2020 elections from her Supreme Court seat. Pew predicts in its research that the number of eligible Hispanic voters in 2020 will tick up to a record 13.3% of the entire American electorate, while eligible Black voters will make about 12.5% of the electorate. So you have a situation here. That translates into, according to Pew Research, about 32 million Hispanics who will be eligible to vote in the 2020 election, and about 30 million eligible Black American voters. So you can see, back to the original premise from which we started this show with, why Biden has used the word soul, and why he has reversed himself from his positions in the 80s and the 90s, because, as my contention, that he's been kidnapped and has willingly been allowed himself to be kidnapped by the far left of the Democrat Party, which really the public face of is the young ones, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Tlaib of all people, and Omar. And Paulsy Pelosi really doesn't quite know how to handle it. And then, of course, you've got the sidebars going on with Sleazy Cummings and Bug Eye Schiff and, of course, Fat Jerry over there trying to rehash all the things that we suffered through for 2 years with the Ghouls report, which came up less than satisfactory to Fat Jerry and his crowd. So what you need to do is stay tuned and make sure that you get the information from someplace that is, gives you a good thorough look at what's going on, because there's going to be the ramp up. And believe me, they've got their guys doing their oppositional, we know what they do. They do their so-called operational research and opposition research, and then they develop the strategies, then they develop the narratives, then they pick the words, and they check them out to see if they stimulate the response that they need. And the facts get lost and they don't mean anything. And the biggest thing going on right now is the success of the economy. I was listening to on Sirius coming over here, the Fox Business Channel, which is the one I like to listen to the most, gives you the most facts and data because it deals with the actual economy. And the economy is going great guns. I mean, we got employment, we've got people, in fact, it's going so good. And this is factoring in the cost of food and also the cost of fuel, that it's going so good that the Fed may lower the interest rates in the fall because there's no inflation and people are working. So that'll be interesting to see what happens in the fall of 2019, and you'll be able to tell if the Fed lowers the interest rates. And the Fed lowers the interest rates, what they're going to be saying is, we don't need to tighten up the money supply because people got money, and we don't need to discourage them from getting money. See, what you do when you go up on the interest rates is you ask people to be you eliminate some people who could otherwise qualify because there's more money they got to come up with to pay the money back they're borrowing. So when you go up on the interest rates, that's what these rigged adjustable rates were all about that blew up on everybody, that Obama and his crowd rigged up, that caused a depression. Recession, I guess you could call it, was you had these adjustable rates, and everybody told the banks, go down there and tell these people, these hapless souls, that they can afford this house. And the reason they can afford it is because we're going to give them a low interest rate right now, but 3 or 4 years from now, when the interest rate goes up, the appreciation of their house will have gone up, and therefore they can sell it, and they won't ever face the increased interest rate and the increased payment. Well, that didn't happen. That didn't happen. The reverse happened. We flooded the market. And you know how that works. So next thing you know, that whole gimmick is out the window. So now we got a better grip on the actual lending of money. And the litmus for that is going to be watch what happens to the interest rates in the fall. So we'll see what happens. It's going to be interesting analysis to follow. The eligible Hispanic voters have boomed in the last couple of decades. As I've said, I've observed there's a big difference, and it's not just me observing, is people analyze the difference between the Puerto Rican vote and the Cuban vote. The Puerto Rican vote and behavior of the Puerto Rican is easier to manipulate by the Democrat, because the Democrat has been giving the Puerto Rican island stuff all along. And so the Puerto Rican island is really used to getting stuff from America. And they've been very lousy in terms of taking care of their own island. And even my good friends from Puerto Rico tell me that. And the place is a mess. So they have a situation there that is not at all like Cuba. Cuba gets nothing from us. In fact, Cuba gets embargoes from us. And yet when Cuban Hispanic votes come here, as we illustrated with our good friend Elio Piadra and some of our other Cuban friends who've been on the show, they're very pro-American. They want to be the citizen the right way. They see nothing but opportunity. They don't want any handouts. They want to get a chance to be an entrepreneur on their own and go forward that way. So it's a totally different. So I would think if I were studying the Hispanic vote and if I were the Republican consultants and analysts, I would want to drill a little deeper on that Hispanic vote and see exactly what you mean when you say Hispanic vote. Where do they come from? Break that down a little bit more carefully, because this Pew Research just lumps it all into one category. And that's not really what it is. It's broken into subcategories. And those subcategories, just as the black Americans are broken into subcategories. And the Democrat Party doesn't want to hear from the Candace Owens component. As far as they're concerned, the Al Sharptons and those people, they don't exist. They actually betray the propaganda that the Sharptons are trying to put out that appeal to the white liberals. So it's really interesting to study. thank you very much for listening in on us today on the Ward Scott Files. And I want to thank Jay, as always, for being my right-hand man behind the wall there. I want to thank all of our sponsors who chip in and help make this a feasible product here. Gators Dockside. I just love to go through the entire list of them that we have here. Our official lawyer. We've got crime prevention. We've been with us from day one. We got some new ones coming around. So I really want to thank everybody who supports us, and because this operation takes a little bit of support. So Jay, have a great day today. Stay dry. Warthog Command Center out.
Thank you. God bless you, and God bless America.
Do you want to put your business in front of 10,000 new customers? Visit wardscottfiles.tv today for more information on our advertising opportunities.